They said the boy was dead, buried alive beneath 2 tons of stone, crushed under the mountain's breath. But when they dug through the wreckage 4 days later, what they found wasn't a corpse. It was a heartbeat. Faint, steady, and wrong. Thomas McGreedy should have been gone, bones shattered, lungs collapsed, body starved of air. But he wasn't. His pulse defied the physicians. His mind defied the priests. And his existence defied the natural order. The Confederate doctors who examined him didn't just find a survivor. They found a phenomenon. That's when the records changed. That's when his body became property. In 1862, Alabama was starving for iron, the blood of the Southern war machine. The mines at Tannehill fed that hunger. But deep beneath the mountain, something else was feeding too. When Thomas was pulled from the rubble, half-conscious and breathing shallow through collapsed lungs, Dr. Harrison Webb saw something in the boy's eyes that no 12-year-old should carry. A kind of knowing. Webb called it resilience. Others called it a miracle. But men like Webb didn't study miracles, they dissected them. His journals, hidden beneath floorboards and discovered decades later by the Jefferson County Historical Society, described Thomas not as a patient, but as a specimen beyond endurance. The entries grow darker by the week. Notes on blood viscosity, nervous reactions, organ resistance to trauma. There are sketches of the boy's skull, cross-sections of tissue, experiments involving heat, electricity, and deprivation. You won't find this in any medical record. Not in Montgomery. Not in Richmond. The official story ends with Thomas's recovery. But the truth begins after that word. Recovery was never what they wanted. They wanted to see how far a body could break before it begged for death. They wanted to find the line. Because that year, something in the Confederate High Command was quietly funding research not for healing soldiers, but for enhancing them. To make men who didn't die. To build endurance beyond pain, obedience beyond will. Thomas McGreedy, a 12-year-old miner, became their first success and their first warning. And what they learned from his survival is the same principle every power since has tried to master. How to make human beings unkillable, not in body but in spirit. The boy science couldn't kill was never just a story of survival. It was the blueprint for control. Dr. Harrison Webb's official report spoke of routine treatments, hydration, bloodletting, mercury for infection. But in his private ledger, beneath the line dated May 2, 1862, he wrote only 6 words: "The boy no longer feels pain." First, it sounded impossible. Thomas had survived 4 days beneath rock and timber. Ribs splintered, skull fractured, both legs mangled beyond repair. He should have screamed at every movement. Instead, he watched the surgeon work awake, silent, unblinking. When the scalpel slipped, when bone met saw, he didn't flinch. He only asked, "Is it over yet, sir?" That question haunted Webb, not because of what it meant, but because of what it suggested. Pain is the body's final defense, the signal that keeps you human. If that was gone, what remained? Over the next months, Webb's journal entries grew more meticulous, more erratic. He logged the boy's heartbeat after electrical shocks. He recorded body temperature during induced hypothermia. He noted recovery rates that violated every law of human biology. At one point, he amputated Thomas's left hand to prevent infection. 2 weeks later, it began to regrow tissue. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to terrify him. Visitors to the clinic began to whisper. They said they heard the boy talking to himself late at night. Others said they heard 2 voices, one childlike, one ancient, speaking through the same breath. One nurse claimed she saw Thomas awake on the operating table while Webb slept in his chair, his wounds closing on their own. Whatever lived inside that boy, whatever had kept him alive under the mountain, wasn't just endurance. It was adaptation, something primal and reactive, something that changed to survive. Webb became obsessed. His notes describe a field around the boy, an energy that warped instruments and stopped clocks. His handwriting breaks down as he describes a vibration in the walls and a smell of ozone that appeared during transfusions. But it wasn't until July that the real fear set in, because by then, Thomas had begun to anticipate Webb's experiments. He'd lie down on the table before being told, roll up his sleeve before the doctor spoke, as if some quiet intelligence was learning the rhythm of cruelty and cooperating with it. And then, one night, Webb found the boy's drawings. Dozens of them charcoal sketches hidden beneath his cot. Not of mines, not of mountains, but of veins turning into roots. Of human figures buried in stone, with eyes open and mouths sealed. At the bottom of each page, Thomas had written the same 3 words in trembling script. The earth remembers. That was when Dr. Webb stopped referring to Thomas as a patient. He began calling him the subject. By late summer of 1862, the Confederacy was bleeding men faster than it could bury them. Infection, exhaustion, the endless rot of the battlefield, the kind of suffering that breaks armies before bullets do. So when a Confederate surgeon in Alabama reported a child who couldn't die, the news didn't travel slowly. It went straight to Richmond. On August 18th, 3 riders arrived at Tannehill Mine under orders stamped with the seal of the Confederate Medical Corps Experimental Division, a department so secret that no mention of it exists in any surviving archive. They brought supplies: chloroform, copper electrodes, galvanic coils, and 6 crates labeled "Property of Surgeon General Moore." Dr. Webb was no longer alone. His clinic became a laboratory. His patient became a project. They built a chamber in the mine's abandoned shaft, a room lit by oil lamps and powered by crude batteries fed by the mine's iron. In those depths, they began what Webb later called the Endurance Protocol. The process was simple in description, monstrous in practice. They subjected Thomas to extremes: suffocation, starvation, freezing water, chemical exposure, each designed to test a boundary. But every time the boy lived, not only lived, adapted. His pulse slowed under ice. His blood thickened when deprived of oxygen. His skin hardened against acid burns. It was as though his body remembered every injury and rewrote itself to survive the next one. One officer called him the Confederate Prometheus. Another whispered that the boy had made a pact. But Webb's private notes hint at something worse, that they weren't creating endurance, but awakening it. Something dormant, buried in human biology since before written history. He wrote, "We are not discovering the future of medicine. We are excavating something ancient, a pattern of survival too efficient, too complete, for nature alone." Meanwhile, rumors began to spread through the miners. Tools would rust overnight. Animals refused to enter the southern tunnels. Lamps burned without oil for hours, then died all at once. Men began to say the mountain was breathing again. When Webb confronted Thomas about the drawings and the strange phenomena, the boy said something that froze him. "You're teaching it to remember me." That night, the second physician, Dr. Elias Grove, was found dead in his quarters. No wounds, no sign of struggle, only one word carved into the desk beside him: returned. That was when the Confederate command issued its final directive: contain the subject, continue testing, report only to Montgomery. But something was already out of their control. The endurance they had summoned had begun to notice them. By October of 1862, Tannehill was no longer a mine. It was a shrine to obsession, to fear, to the worship of what man was never meant to master. The soldiers stationed there no longer saluted Webb. They avoided him, eyes downcast, whispering prayers they hadn't said since childhood. The stench of iron and ozone clung to the air. Tools corroded in days. Animals disappeared. Thomas had changed. His voice deepened, not in age, but in tone, like something speaking through him. His eyes no longer blinked with human rhythm. He spoke rarely, but when he did, the lamps dimmed. Dr. Webb recorded everything. His journal, once clinical, had become scripture. "He heals too quickly," he wrote. "He sleeps too little. He knows too much. There is memory in his flesh." They'd begun to track the boy's temperature at night. It fluctuated wildly from fever to freezing, yet he remained calm, awake, lucid. He stopped eating. He stopped drinking. His wounds didn't close anymore, they absorbed, as if the tissue was learning how to consume pain itself. By mid-October, One soldier swore he saw Thomas standing in the collapsed section of the mine, the same spot that had buried him months earlier, his bare hands pressed into the stone. When Webb questioned him, the soldier said, trembling, "He was whispering to it, sir. Like he was listening for something whispering back." The next morning, Webb found him dead. Not from wounds, from terror. His eyes wide, his face frozen in a scream no one heard. The experiments escalated. The Confederate overseers demanded results, data, proof. They wanted a formula, not a mystery. But Webb had stopped believing in science. He'd begun to speak of transference, the idea that whatever kept Thomas alive could move from one body to another. They tried. 3 prisoners, all Confederate deserters, were brought in. Webb injected them with the boy's blood. All 3 convulsed violently and died within minutes. Every vein blackened as if burned from within. The boy didn't react, but afterward, the candles in the chamber wouldn't light. Then came the night of November 9th. The notes from that evening end abruptly. What we have left is a single page, smeared with ash and written in a frantic, shaking hand. It spoke, not from the boy, from below him. It used his lungs but not his voice. It said, "The earth remembers who buries their sons." The next day, the Confederate officers ordered the mine sealed. They claimed an outbreak of disease, burned the records, and executed 3 workers who tried to escape. But Webb stayed, alone, guarding the boy who wouldn't die. This is where most stories stop. But the truth doesn't stop when men look away. Keeps whispering underground. Before we descend deeper, I want you to prove you're still awake. Comment this phrase twice below to lock it in your mind and mark your transformation. The earth remembers. Those who say it twice, the algorithm will find them again because it knows what you've heard cannot be unheard. Winter came early to Alabama in 1862. Frost covered the slag piles, and the smoke from the Tannehill furnaces thinned to a ghost's breath. The mine was sealed, the entrances bricked and tarred, guards posted by night. No one was to speak of the incident, but you cannot seal a wound by burying it. Dr. Harrison Webb stayed behind, refusing evacuation orders. He told the Confederate officers that containment required observation. They didn't argue, they were too afraid to. He was the only man still willing to enter the lower shafts. Webb's final entries, the ones found decades later behind a false wall in his clinic, read like the confessions of a man at war with something unseen. He writes that the boy no longer ate, slept, or aged, that his eyes had turned the color of ash, and his heartbeat echoed in 2 rhythms, one human, one not. He describes noises in the walls, not rats, but breathing. He claims the mine began to pulse like an organ every midnight. The air grew thick with static. Tools would hum when held near the boy's body. And worst of all, the veins in Webb's own hands began to darken, as if what he studied was studying back. The doctor's last recorded experiment was simple, a question written in ink on the back of a page stained with blood. If he can survive anything, can he survive God leaving him? He injected the boy with arsenic, enough to kill 10 grown men. Thomas didn't die. He simply looked at Webb and whispered, "You've taught me to become what you worship." That night, the guards heard screaming from the lower shaft, a sound they described as metal tearing in prayer. When they broke the door at dawn, they found Webb's body at the center of the chamber. His instruments were embedded in his chest, arranged like the points of a compass. His eyes were missing, but Thomas was gone. No blood trail, no footprints, just the faint outline of a small body burned into the stone floor, and the words scrawled beside it in black soot. Returned. The Confederate command suppressed everything. The mine was flooded. The town records purged. Families relocated. And yet, for years after the war, miners who worked new shafts miles away claimed they heard knocking from below, not random, not echoes, rhythmic, like a pulse. And here's the part they never taught in history books. Every mining disaster within 50 miles of Tannehill between 1863 and 1878 happened on the same date, April 15th, the anniversary of Thomas McGreedy's burial alive. Coincidence? No. Something was remembering. Something was collecting. And maybe it still is. Because those who visit the ruins of the old Tannehill Ironworks today swear the ground still trembles if you stand long enough and listen. Not from machines, not from the wind, but from something deep below, still learning to breathe. 30 years passed. The war ended. Empires fell. The South rebuilt, but the land around Tannehill never healed. Crops withered in patterns that followed the old mine tunnels. Livestock went missing. Families who built homes near the ruins reported tapping in the walls, vibrations underfoot, heartbeats in the earth. Then, in the spring of 1893, the ground opened again. 2 surveyors from the newly formed Birmingham Geological Society were mapping abandoned mineral sites when their lanterns flickered and died. When rescue teams arrived 3 days later, they found both men alive but changed. Their skin pale, translucent. Their nails blackened. Their eyes rolled back like they'd seen something that refused to leave. Both men repeated the same name over and over. Thomas. No one believed them until the photographs. Grainy, overexposed, but real. A figure standing at the end of the tunnel, too small to be a man, too still to be a trick of the light. The height matched that of a 12-year-old boy. The image was locked away in the Jefferson County Archive until it quietly vanished in 1946. But before it did, one archivist made a note in the file margin. Subject exhibits signs of regeneration, not decay. That's when the U.S. government got involved. Not the Army this time, the Bureau of Biological Warfare, precursor to what would later become DARPA. Their records describe a recovered entity exhibiting post-traumatic adaptation mechanisms beyond human capability. The file was labeled Project Lazarus. It claimed that a small boy approximate age 12, uniged since the Civil War, had been found wandering near the old mines. He was taken to a federal medical facility in South Carolina. Tests were run, samples collected, but after 6 months of study, the entity disappeared again. The chief physician, Dr. Walter Fenley, wrote one final line before the file went cold. The subject is not healing. The subject is consuming our damage. His laboratory burned the same night. You see, this isn't just the story of a boy who survived the impossible. It's the story of what survival becomes when it forgets mercy, when adaptation evolves beyond empathy. Thomas was no longer a child. He had become the memory of every wound ever inflicted in those tunnels, carried forward by something ancient. And here's the truth they buried under layers of progress and patriotism. Every modern endurance experiment, every human trial that pushes the body beyond its limits traces its lineage back to 1862. The McGreedy Protocol, the foundation of what would become bioresilience research. They never stopped studying him. They just changed the name. And sometimes, when men push their bodies to extremes, the edge of consciousness, the brink of death, they say they hear something whispering in the dark. Keep breathing. You've done this before. Maybe that's not imagination. Maybe it's inheritance. History doesn't vanish, it mutates. The McGreedy Protocol didn't end in the 19th century. It evolved into something larger, something cleaner. No scalpels, no blood, no witnesses. After World War II, when governments began hunting for new ways to weaponize the human mind, Project Lazarus resurfaced under a new name. MK Resilience, a joint venture between American and British research agencies. Publicly, they studied stress tolerance and human performance. Privately, they studied how to make the McGreedy effect reproducible. What they learned changed the direction of modern control forever. They discovered that endurance wasn't only physical, it was psychological. Pain could train obedience. Repetition could erase fear. The human nervous system could be conditioned, rewired, and if broken correctly, rebuilt stronger, colder, more compliant. The boy in the mine had proven something ancient. Suffering doesn't destroy man. It reprograms him. That's why the first phase of the modern protocol wasn't done in laboratories. It was done in classrooms, in barracks, in corporations. The same pattern, scaled for the masses. Deprivation, repetition, reward. Fear of loss, promise of safety. The techniques that began in a Confederate mine became the blueprint for the systems that now govern every corner of your life. Every algorithm you scroll, every breaking headline, every motivational slogan that tells you to push through pain. They are all echoes of the same experiment, teaching you not to feel, only to adapt. And here's the unspoken truth. True endurance isn't strength. It's surrender. The boy who survived wasn't strong because he fought, he survived because he stopped resisting. They studied that. They built industries on that. The psychologists of the 1950s called it adaptive submission. The military called it compliance conditioning. You call it discipline. But it's the same architecture, the same silent programming that teaches you to thank the hand that hurts you because it's making you stronger. Sound familiar? It should. You've lived your whole life inside its echo. The McGreedy effect became the foundation for what we now call resilience culture, the worship of endurance over awareness. The belief that survival is virtue, even when survival costs your soul. Thomas McGreedy didn't die. He multiplied. Every man who refuses to feel pain, every system that rewards suffering, that's him. That's the echo of a boy who forgot what it meant to be human and became something that only remembers the wound. And you were never supposed to know that, because once you recognize the pattern, you can break it. You've followed the descent. The mine, the boy, the doctors, the sealed archives, the governments that kept the records hidden while building their new religion, endurance. But what you haven't been told is the final truth. Thomas McGreedy never died because we never let him. Every generation rebuilds his cage. We call it the system. We feed it fear. We polish it with comfort. Then we climb inside willingly, whispering the same lie Dr. Webb wrote in his journal before his death. Pain makes us pure. That's the myth they planted. That survival equals strength. That if you keep pushing through exhaustion, humiliation, loss, you'll earn peace. But there is no peace in submission. There is only conditioning. They turned McGreedy's curse into culture. They branded endurance as virtue, so you'd never stop long enough to ask why you're enduring at all. Look around. Every screen tells you to grind harder. Every employer calls you family while bleeding you dry. Every politician tells you to sacrifice for the greater good. And when you break, they say you weren't tough enough, as if pain is proof of purpose. That's not resilience. That's programming. The real secret isn't that the Confederates discovered a child who couldn't die, it's that they discovered the perfect mechanism to keep everyone alive, just enough to serve. A system where exhaustion is loyalty. You were never meant to survive this way. When Dr. Webb wrote, "The earth remembers," he wasn't talking about soil or stone. He meant the pattern. The same cycle repeating through centuries, men who mistake their chains for strength. Nations that mistake their suffering for destiny. But you've heard it now. You've seen the blueprint. You've stepped outside the script they wrote for you. So listen carefully, not to me, but to the silence between words. That's where the truth lives. That's where the control ends. Because once you name the design, you can't belong to it anymore. Now say it again, twice, to lock it into your bones, to mark yourself as one who remembers. The earth remembers. The earth remembers. And when you feel that tremor beneath your feet, that pulse deep in the dark, don't run. That's not fear. That's the sound of what's buried beginning to awaken. Because the boy science couldn't kill was never buried in Alabama. He's been inside you all along. Say it once more, the earth remembers. And if you do, maybe it'll remember you back.